Alrighty, I'm going to give it a shot. It's 9 a.m. on my clock. I'm going to check if I can actually get these comments to all drop away. No, I can't. It's alright. Doesn't matter. Morning, folks. It's Marc for Spirit Hive this morning, the live hive COVID-19 Corona style. Unfortunately, we couldn't be at the good old botanical gardens anymore. Well, for obvious reasons, and we're doing it from home now, so no funky music, no coffee and tea, unless you got your own. And you'll have me for half an hour only, half an hour sharp, and I really need to be sharp. It's like cue on, because Michelle will come on at 9:30 and do her sessions for the kiddies, and I have to be out there or it all goes wrong. So I'm going to get cracking. I'm always very aware of time. I know I've got a lot to talk about, and there's so much that I would like to talk about, but today we're going to talk about attachment and involvement. And I'm looking at my little Eye of Sauron there, if you know Lord of the Rings, my little webcam here. Okay, why is that such an important topic? Well, I don't think that either Michelle or Karen, when they thought about making the topics for 2020, would have ever thought that this topic would be as important as it is right now, attachment and involvement. If they would have known what was going to happen in April 2020, they probably would have chuckled with putting those topics together. It's so funny. Why is it important? Well, I can only imagine that what you're going through right now is pretty much what I'm going through right now, to a higher or lesser degree. We're all going through some stuff with this COVID-19. Attachment, letting go, letting stuff be, not making too much of a fuss about stuff while still staying very involved with what's going on is massively important. Either you or someone you know, directly or indirectly, will have been involved with the COVID-19, the coronavirus, let's call it crisis, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, perhaps even opportunity. And many people will be affected in different ways, and some really bad. You know, some people will have lost jobs, some people can't visit family, some people will obviously actually have gone very ill and potentially even died. There will be all sorts of indirect and direct consequences of this stuff, and it messes with our heads. It messes with my head. I can only assume that it messes with your head, as it does with everyone's. I think there's probably no one that is not affected in any way, shape or form at all. Can you feel it? I can feel it. My favorite word, apart from interesting is one of my favorite words ever. I use that for everything because it feels so much better than terrible, horrible, excruciating, abominable. Interesting is an interesting word. The capping word that I've used for my emotions over the last couple of weeks is unsettled. I feel very unsettled. Even though I'm a fairly level-headed guy, I feel unsettled. And oh yeah, by the way, if you got a comment, you got a question, feel free. I've got my personal assistant, Ms. Karen Smith, on the other side, just typing away if necessary and answering your question. So feel free to pop something in there. I will not look. It'll distract me, but Karen will be most happy to let her fingers run on the keyboard and answer your questions. So back to this unsettled. I've definitely felt unsettled. I've felt insecure a little bit. I have felt very frustrated. A couple of days ago I was enormously frustrated and irritated and annoyed about my freedom being curtailed, and about our trip to Europe to go and see our lovely daughter not going ahead, and all sorts of other stuff, and I was so angry. That's normal. We all feel a particular way about this stuff, and it's entirely normal to feel that way right now. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is, for some people, potentially a couple of straws to clutch on if you're not doing well. For other people, it's going to build a foundation to say, okay, yeah, that's a cool way of looking at stuff. I can use that. For other people, it will be a confirmation of what they knew already, but at least I'm trying to get across that once you know what is happening inside this little noggin of yours, then we can start changing a couple of things. You need to be aware of what's going on in here as relative to what's going on out there in order to make sense of it all. So we'll talk about that. And like I said, 5 minutes in already. I'll have to go fairly fast. I'll go a little bit philosophical. I'll go a little bit neurological, neuroscience-y, and we'll go very practical. I'll give you 3 to 4 really practical ideas that you can take away today, that you can start practicing right now, that ideally, Counselling 101 style, should start making a difference, ideally, to how you feel and how you can deal with this situation. So stay with me. As I said in the last Hive, I have a tendency to go fast. I do not make excuses for that. If it goes too fast, you can always ask me questions later. I'm very open and available for discussion, for interaction, for little Facebook chats, or just general face-to-face chats. We can still do them, or we'll do a virtual coffee over the internet. And I've got my little glass of water here, so I'm going to take a sip, and then we'll get straight into it. Now, in Buddhism, which I kind of like, I'm not a practicing Buddhist, but there's a bunch of Buddhist philosophical principles that I really like. There's one equation, one mathematical equation, it's the only one. It actually says that suffering is pain times resistance. So suffering equals pain times resistance. What does that mean? It's like, well, in Buddhism there's a story about every person, when it comes to emotional stuff, always getting shot by 2 arrows. We always get shot by 2 arrows. The first arrow we get shot by when something happens to us is the actual hurt, the physical pain of what we feel, literally or physically, or figuratively speaking, pain obviously, but it's the impact of what happens. In COVID-19, Corona has an impact, no doubt about it, in whatever way. The second arrow is the one that actually challenges our beliefs, our concepts, our ideas about what life should be like, about what life is, our strongly held, sometimes even fixed ideas about who we think we were, what we think we should be doing, and who we want to become. And that's the one that actually creates resistance. So when you look at what creates our suffering, it's not often Buddhist principle, and there's something, the suffering is not the actual first arrow that hits you. That's just, I say that with a lot of respect, but that's the pain, that's the impact that something has on us, and that's obvious. Everything has an impact, but the suffering is created by us making a big issue about that, because it challenges our worldview. It makes a massive mess of who we think we are and what we do, and that's where the problems start. So attachment, if we're talking about attachment, is this idea that we need to hold on, to rely on, to build on, to feel safe by, holding on to something or some people that ultimately, or situations that are ultimately always impermanent. Because that's one of the second laws in Buddhism. Everything, and I talked about that in the Life Hive quite a bit actually, everything is impermanent. Everything is always in a state of flux. And that is how it is. The guy I was 20 years ago is not the guy I'm today. And actually the guy that will be sitting here 10 minutes from now is not the guy that is sitting here right now. And the guy that started this Life Hive, he's no longer here either. And it's the same for you. We're constantly changing. We're constantly changing. And some people go like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. But it's true, hey, we're constantly changing. So what creates that suffering is the resistance to that change. The resistance to things just being the way they are, and us wanting them to be different. And that's something I discussed in the last Hive as well, quite in depth, is that our suffering is more mentally emotional because expectations we had about how life should be, or what should be happening, or the expectations that we've had for 5, 10, 20 years from now, or what we think we should be doing, or how our life is going to unfold, get shot by things like Corona, COVID. They just get completely shot. And that plays with our head. It throws a massive spanner in the work. We want things to be the same. They can't. We want to keep things that are good forever. Doesn't happen. And we don't want things we don't want to come into our lives, and still they do. And sometimes at the most unexpected, most inconvenient, most everything really, they just hit us. So how is that attachment created? Well, that's because we think we have a certain identity. We think we are someone. We think that this body, my body in this case, your body in your case, we think we are something, someone, that we have a story that we weave together from, oh, well, you know, I'm a father, I'm an ex-lawyer, I'm a Dutchman, I had, you know, a mum and a dad, but I was mainly raised by my mother. I loved law, then I left law alone, then I became a counsellor, and now I'm director of Spirit Hive, and next year I'm going to do this, and then 10 years from now I want to do that. And that life narrative seems to create a sense of identity. It seems to create a sense of me. But it's actually not true. It's a story. And it's a good story. I mean, not all of it, but mostly it's a good story. But it's just a story. It's a story I tell myself, and it's a story I tell others, and then it's a story that others tell others about me, and then it becomes me. Well, that's Marc, you know, the ex-lawyer, and now the counsellor and the director of Spirit Hive. But I go like, well, is it really me, or is it just a made-up story that we all believe? And that's the philosophical bit, you know? Like, is there actually a me? Well, no. There isn't. There isn't. Well, okay, I'm not going to go spiritual here. I've got a couple ideas on that. But really, there is no me. There's just a story of me. And this is the neuroscientific bit. There's actually a brain part that goes with that, and it sits roughly there, and it runs towards the back. It's the medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex, which run sort of on the inside, obviously. They call it the default mode network, the DMN. Now, what is a default? Well, it comes on by default when we are not doing much. So when you're sleeping, your DMN, default mode network, comes on. It comes online. It actually runs the show. It's the general housekeeper of your brain. It comes on, it just does its thing, but it's also very much self-referential. So it processes you. It gives you an idea of who you are, what you do. It comes online when you're daydreaming, when your mind is wandering. It comes on when we feel challenged in an idea that we have or in a belief that we hold. So it comes on when our sense of identity gets challenged. It actually lights up, and they can see that now. Yeah, it comes online. Now, that part of your brain is what lots of neuroscientists and psychologists call the me network, the I, me, my network, because it's the part that allows me to go in the past and say, well, that was who I was, to the, well, maybe not the present, but then jump into the future and actually says, oh, that's who I think I will be. And now we've got the story of me going on. So that part of your brain, planning for the future, comparing to the past, that's part of that me network, and that gives us that sense of identity. But it's all a story, it's all fake. So because we are so hooked on this identity, so attached to who we think we were, who we think we are right now, and who we think we will be into the future, when something like COVID-19 or coronavirus happens, that gets massively challenged. It gets massively challenged because all of a sudden the whole paradigm is changing. Nothing what we thought was true is true anymore. Yeah, the money we thought we had in our super account is all of a sudden gone. The money we were making maybe through investment properties, now that renters maybe are not paying anymore, the house prices are going down, all of a sudden that's no longer there. The plans you had for retirement or the plans you had for work, if you've been laid off, or the fact that you thought you were in a secure job, all of a sudden they're no longer so secure because they get challenged by what's going on, and no one saw that coming, and that creates that suffering. So Alan Watts, a philosopher who I really like listening to, he's funny and he's very profound. He said, look, creating this sense of identity in ourselves is like trying to bite your own teeth. It's impossible. You can't. It's just not possible. You can't bite your own teeth. And that's the problem where we are caught up in now. So what to do? What to do? And looking at the clock, because I got 50 minutes and time goes fast. So what to do? Well, non-attachment is this idea of letting go of preconceived ideas of who we are, letting go of outcomes that we have set ourselves that now might not come about, letting go of past stories of who you think you are relative to who you are now and who you want to be, and then labeling your life good, bad, or ugly, beautiful, or disgusting, And it's that letting go process. But that's so tough. It's letting life unfold the way it does. Letting outcomes come the way they do. And riding along, surfing that wave, just surf the wave of life. Now, you might say to me, like, well, Marc, that sounds like a pretty, that's a pretty non-committal attitude towards life. Like I should just sit down and just wait for things to happen. No, of course not. No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means you let go of the attachment to that particular outcome as being the good one and a potential other outcome as being the bad one. Now, I remember a story when I was going through some tough time a couple of years ago, and a really good friend of mine, dear friend Jean Sheehan, I went to her for some counsel, and Jean, I planted a banana crop and now I'm getting freaking tomatoes. I didn't want tomatoes, I wanted bananas. And now I'm stuck with these bloody tomatoes. And Jean, wise as she is, said, tomatoes are beautiful. And she was so right. But that's the tricky bit for our noggin, because if we do something with a particular intention and that intention doesn't pan out, guess what? We have now become attached to that intention, and then it's tough to say that tomatoes are beautiful as well, which they actually are. I had to learn that lesson for myself. So now we have this running joke, Jean and I, that we talk about tomatoes and bananas all the time, because life is just full of tomatoes and bananas, and both are equally holy. Both are equally good. So, what do you do? What do you do? Well, here's number one. And, yep, I'm good. 14 minutes to go. And I'll tell you a couple of stories if I've got time left. But here's number one. Becoming more present is always a good idea. Becoming more present means that you're not spinning stories about the past anymore. You're not spinning too many stories about the future, holding on to those ones because they were so good or so bad, or trying to kick them away. Not going for these ones as if they were going to make your life so much better, or you're looking to them as if like, oh, I got that, I hope that doesn't happen. No, it's being here in the present. What actually happens, and that's mindfulness science, if you will. It's psychological science. The default mode network, the I, me, my network that gives you that self-referential processing, it deactivates when you meditate. It stops. There's no need to have an engine idle and do housekeeping and self-processing when you're active, when you're actually focusing on some stuff. So if you meditate or brain train or visualize, whatever you want to call it, some people have a bit of a tough time with the word meditation, but if you do some mental activity where you have to focus and concentrate and keep that focus there and bring it back when it wanders off and maintain your attention on one thing, the default mode network deactivates. In Buddhist spiritual terms, that would mean you become more in touch with the present moment. And that's a good thing. That's always a good thing. So tip number one, start doing some mindfulness exercises. I've talked with Karen about putting together maybe a 6 to 8 week or session group, or we'll have to see how that goes, live or online mindfulness group and for really low amount of money, hardly anything, and everything will go back into Spirit Hive, to help people to become more present and actually makes use of those neuroscientific truths that said that our default mode network, the I, me, my network, shuts off when we become more present. So we become more in tune with who we really are, what's going on. So that's a really good one to do. Funnily enough, we all know it. Personal growth, the word growth means change. It's like it's just logical and it makes sense. So as soon as you talk about personal growth, you talk about change. So you can't stay the same and grow personally. You have to change. It's just that these ideas in our little noggin just play havoc and play tricks on us. They do funny things. So personal growth in that sense, from a mindfulness meditation point of view, is that we are unlearning to attach. We unlearn to stay focused on what we think is true and what should be. And we learn to become more okay with what actually is. Now remember the two arrows. It might well be that there's one arrow that hits you and it hurts, and that's okay. But that's not suffering yet, remember? The equation goes like suffering is pain times resistance. If we learn to not resist that first arrow and just take the hit, if it's a bad one, and just sit with that and go, man, that sucked, yeah, then there is no suffering, there's just pain. And pain is nasty, but pain will go. As long as we don't make it suffering by our own resistance, thinking that now our life is so much worse, or it could have been so much better and now it isn't, then there's actually not a lot wrong. There's not a lot going on. So what's number 2? That's the mindfulness part, aware of the clock. My part number 2 has to do with a counselling modality, if you will, psychological modality that I really like, acceptance and commitment therapy, called ACT. A lot of people call it ACT, and the linguistic guy in me has a brain fart around that one, because the founders of ACT actually wanted to call it ACT because it has got to do with action. So acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT says that we can definitely be ambitious and we can definitely be involved, attachment versus involvement, as long as we stay true to who we believe we truly are. And there is a bit of thinking involved. So yeah, I know you're going to shoot at me. He's like, well, how does that fit with thinking, Mark? It's like, well, obviously we want to do something. So can we be ambitious? Yes, we can. But can we also be ambitiously non-attached? Yes, we can as well. Yeah. So ACT actually states is like, and I'm going to talk plain English, people. So if you're offended by poop words, don't listen anymore. But this is how I often discuss it with clients of mine. Is that, look, you can go through life and do whatever you want, but sometimes life just throws a bucket load of shit over you. And it stinks. And then you stink. You stink. You just stink. You can say, oh, no, Mark, I've transcended that. I'm far beyond that. I'm so spiritual. My eyes are like, I can feel past the smell and go like, yeah, that's all good and great. But to me, you still stink. It's just obvious you stink. So that's error number 1, remember? Now, you don't have to make a big deal about it. So what ACT says is like, sometimes life just stinks. Shit happens. Bucket loads sometimes get poured over you. On the other hand, if you want to make something out of your life to get really back in touch with your values, that's number 2 on the things to do for you, it actually doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. If you can back in touch with your values and say and find out what's really important to you, whether it's things like understanding, gratitude, spirituality, connection, acceptance, tolerance, patience, presence, self-love, all those higher values, then it doesn't matter if you get covered in shit. You just start wiping it off, knowing that you're actually still on track and you can just still moving. Now, there's a difference between values and goals. There's a marginal difference there. Values are overall directions, heading west, for instance, whereas goals are destinations, going to Alice Springs. Yeah, so values, you can't ever get there. A value is not meant to be achieved. A value is something that you pursue for the rest of your life. A goal can be based on a value, ideally is based on values, but it's an actual destination that you can tick off on a list so you can get there. So to get back in touch, even in times of coronavirus and COVID, about what's going on, you want to start getting back in touch with your values. What right now, as we're all stuck at home, we can't do our normal thing. What is really important? What is important in terms of relationships, health, connection, family, work, spirituality, your own personal growth, your social context, what can you do, what can't you do, and really start sitting down and coming up with a couple of good ideas on what you can do. Because not only can do, because that's the third part, but what is important. So sit down with that. And here's one I prepared earlier. This one, hopefully you can see it, otherwise I'll have it ready for you. Pretty much gives you an idea of areas of life that you can focus in. So this one gives you 4: work, education, leisure, personal growth, health, and relationships. But you can pretty much come up with values in all sorts of areas of life. Now, once you do that, you'll start to go towards what Buddhism calls wholesome happiness. It's that idea of finding out what's wholesome, what's good for you, as opposed to what's unwholesome, what's not so good for you. Buddhism says attachment and sticking to things because you need to stick to them, they're unwholesome. Going for things that really uplift you, that make you feel joyful, that make you feel light, that make you feel hopeful, that make you feel optimistic, more wholesome. And those are the ones that you can actually go to as long as you don't get attached to them. And that's where the trick lies, obviously. Hey, it's like it's a direction that you can go to because it's a good direction to go in, it's a wholesome direction to go in, and still you try not to get attached to whatever outcome, whatever goal you set based on that value. As long as you just keep going for that value, you'll be doing all right. Now, here's number three. So once we're doing our meditation a little bit more, or our brain training, once we can start to get in contact with our values a little bit more, so we now know what rough direction we want to keep heading in. Remember, you can't achieve that, but you can always keep working towards that and really get close to that. Then we can start to get committed, the acceptance and commitment bit. That's where involvement comes in. Involvement also comes in values, obviously, but the commitment bit really comes into action setting, to goal setting. So once you've got an idea of who you are, now that you become more present, who's really you, now that you've got an idea on what it is that is really important to you, especially in times like these, start taking some action. Do some stuff. Put some mental, some emotional, some physical goals in place and start doing them. It doesn't matter if they actually come to fruition or not, or if they work out or not. I was listening to a TED Talk the other day, and I did a little video on that one. She said, look, this psychologist lady said there's a really good tool in anxiety and depression, which actually means just do it, and do it poorly, but just do something. Don't just sit still, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Do something, start something, and even if it's poorly, it's better than doing nothing at all. It's the same with this. Ideally, you do it based on your values and it's solid action, but start putting something in place. Now that we're all cooped up at home, make it fun. We actually revived our good old Wii from 2008 or 2009, and Simone and I are playing golf and bowling and doing all sorts of fun stuff. I've actually now created more time for myself to do some proper exercise and to sit still and do some more meditating and reading of my Course in Miracles and all that sort of stuff. Come up with things that actually support you and take action on those ones. That constantly keeps shutting their default mode network off, because you take an action, you do things, and it makes you feel like you're useful. It makes you feel wholesome. I got to read that one. Do I? Nah, actually I don't. No, it's not necessary. There was a saying I was going to say, but it doesn't really matter. But it gives you this idea of being active and working towards something that is better. And uncertainty can absolutely be your companion. It doesn't matter. It's okay to feel like I feel unsettled. It's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay to feel insecure. It's okay to feel fearful. It's okay to have health anxiety. It's okay to be concerned for your kids. I'm concerned for my daughter, Kiara. She's in England, cooped up somewhere in a pub where she works. Of course I'm concerned every now and then. On the other hand, there's still stuff that we can do according to our values, my values, that can be a contributor to that. So, the last thing, I got 2 minutes and then I'm out of here. There's a little story, a little one, that basically said, we're on a boat, and our boat is our body, and we're in this massive ocean, just trying to steer our way through. Now, what happens? Well, you're the captain, but as long as you have your rudder, you got hold of the steering wheel and your rudder is working, as long as you still have your engine operating, it does not matter how big the swell is, how massively the currents are, what sort of storms you're facing. As long as you still got your compass, and as long as you still got a lighthouse in the distance that you can go for, or a port, you will be absolutely fine, and you can weather those storms. Keep that in mind. You got that control. You are on your boat is working. The engine is working, heart and head. You're holding onto the steering wheels with your muscles. You got a lighthouse, and your brain, your ideas are the compass that you can go by. As long as you got that, you meditate, you get clear on your values, you take some committed action towards what you think is really important, you'll be absolutely fine. So that's all I got. Your fate is only in this moment, really. This moment determines your next moment. So as long as you can keep that in mind, I'm happy. If you got questions, feel free to text us. Go on the Spirit Hive site. If you'd like to donate to Spirit Hive, please do. And if you got questions to me, find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, text me, email me, ring me, whatever you know where to find me. And I bid you a great Sunday, and we'll see you soon.